For Creamer Media's Polity, I am Shannon de Rehove. Researcher and analyst Professor Raymond Suttner joins me for Suttner's View, a weekly commentary on South Africa's political scene. Welcome, Professor.
Thanks a lot.
This past week has seen photographs of armed gunmen in ANC regalia identified as ANC officials and government bodyguards facing protesters in Beckersdale. There have been photographs also of a policeman shooting protesters at point-blank range. Now, is this resort to legal weaponry necessary, and does it constitute a danger for democracy?
I've been mulling over this since I saw the photographs, and there are a number of issues that come to mind. On the one hand, the bodyguards and the policemen came in after the ANC delegation was met by an angry crowd. So the first thing that we know is that people are still very angry about the Premier's remark that we do not want your dirty votes. And this is an area which has got similar problems to other parts of the country. Toilets that are not working, or that there are no toilets, houses that are not properly built, or that someone jumps the queue, and alleged corruption, and there's allegedly a grant from Shaloa's period as Premier for development, and it's not been properly accounted for where that was supposed to be spent in the area. So there was this anger. However, something that is maybe forgotten in our shock about the people wielding guns is that the ANC had a legal right to enter the area. Every organization, the weakest and the most powerful, has a legal right to canvass support during elections and at every other time. There are not supposed to be any no-go areas. So the question then arises, this right was infringed on by the angry residents of Beckersdale. How was the ANC's right to enter to be enforced? And it's not clear what degree of negotiation, to what extent there was negotiation, at what point they pulled out their guns, what weaponry there was on the side of the Beckersdale people. Now, police and intelligence forces must have known what level of threat there was, and it's another one of those cases where one is not sure that the methods of crowd control that were used, since there were South African police services there, not just ANC, whether they employed lesser weaponry prior to pulling out guns. Now, what does appear from the evidence is that an ANC official had a gun. He's shown in a picture. But what is interesting, which is unusual in these times, is that the Gauteng ANC have investigated this, and they've asked that the law should take its course against this person carrying a weapon in public, which is illegal. It's illegal for a number of reasons, but I think it's important in the present period that the Gauteng ANC has recognized the need to stick by legality and constitutionalism, which is not a pattern in the current period. But we also see bodyguards with guns. Now, the reports say they shot in the air, but we don't know whether they actually injured someone, but there is, or killed anyone. It may be, we don't have the information. There is this shocking picture of a policeman aiming at point blank. Now, you can cause brain damage, people have lost their eyes, through rubber bullets at such short range, and they've been killed. So that the fact that it's used, we don't know whether he's using a rubber bullet, but assuming it's a rubber bullet, it is lethal at that close distance. So what this raises for me is the question of the prevalence of non-violence in the society. We have a culture historically of resort to violence rather than reasoning. It's not just the ANC, it's not just the police, it is part of a macho culture that permeates all sections of the population. It's manifested in this worship of this tough, rough masculinity. The big, tough rugby player, the person who, when you look at him, will say, "Why are you staring?" and before you get a chance to answer, may clap you. And there is this worship in some townships of gangsters. So we have a culture historically and in politics whereby under the apartheid regime things were imposed by force on people, and the ANC, after a long period of peaceful struggle, did take up arms. The question that we have to ask ourselves is the conditions under which the ANC justified the resort to arms are no longer there. We now ought to have peace. Why is peace not being built? How is peace being built?
Now, violence appears to be present in a range of spheres of South African society, emanating from the state but also within communities, as you've mentioned in Beckersdale. Is this something with which we have to learn to live, or is it a question that we can try and address and try to eradicate?
You know, when you read about a place like the United Kingdom, sociologists say that people fear, there's not a correspondence between their fear of violence and the actual violence. Sort of myths emerge about foreigners being a threat, and the actual threat doesn't correspond. Now, the problem in South Africa is that the threat is probably as great as the fear, because all of us know there's hardly any of us who have not experienced some form of crime or some form of violence in our lives. And I think in some of the communities, the violence has got something to do with the conditions under which people live. If a community is disintegrating and in the conditions under which some people are living, you can't build bonds between people. And when you can't build bonds between people, if nothing ties me to the next person and I'm hanging around unemployed, it's an environmental condition that makes it easier for people to do criminal acts and acts of violence against one another. And I think we may well find that this violence against children, rapes of children and so forth, is primarily, but not exclusively, because one rape was in Brakpan, a white man who's allegedly gay. So, you know, there's a whole lot of conditions that affect different types of violence. But my feeling is one of the things is the breakdown or the absence of communities, community bonds. But I think it's very important that we start communicating to society at large that non-violence is not for sissies. Non-violence is actually a principle on which relations between human beings have to be built. If a person is subjected to abuse at home, that is not a healthy relationship. If I walk down the street and I fear that every second person may assault me, That is not a healthy social fabric. So we need a situation where the leadership sets an example. They do not carelessly invoke slogans like shoot to kill. They do not sing songs like bring me my machine gun outside a war context. We need the example from the leadership, but we need a new generation to be built up, committed to the values of peace. I don't think people understand adequately how important peace is and how valuable it is. Nelson Mandela went to jail as the founder of MK, as a fighter. But when he saw that it was possible to have peace, he worked for peace. Now that is the legacy we must build on.
Let's hope that we do. Thank you very much for your time. That was Professor Raymond Suttner speaking about politics and elections in South Africa.